How can a 17-day kidnapping in a soundproof bunker be the one thing that saves a child's life? This is the unbelievable true story of Katie Beers. In December 1992, just 2 days before her 10th birthday, 9-year-old Katie Beers vanished. The man who took her, John Esposito, was a friend of the family. He wasn't just a predator, he was a meticulous planner. For months, he had been building a secret prison under his house, a 6 by 7-foot concrete cell, hidden by a 200-pound trapdoor, designed for one purpose: to imprison Katie. But what investigators would soon discover was that Katie's 17-day nightmare in that bunker was an escape from a different kind of horror. This is the story not just of a horrific crime, but of a rescue that came from the most unimaginable place. The betrayal of innocence. To understand the horrific abduction of 9-year-old Katie Beers, one must first journey into the world she inhabited long before she vanished. The 17 days she spent in an underground prison are a story of shocking cruelty, but they cannot be understood as an isolated event. They are, instead, the devastating culmination of a childhood that had already been stolen. Katie Beers' story does not begin on December 28, 1992. It begins in the rooms of a house where the very concept of safety was absent. Official reports, and her own courageous accounts years later, paint a grim, consistent portrait. This was a childhood marked by a profound and chronic void, a world of deep, systemic neglect. This was not a case of simple poverty. It was a complete failure of adult protection. Katie and her brother were children left to navigate a world of squalor and chaos. Basic needs, cleanliness, consistent food, emotional support, were luxuries they were rarely afforded. She was, in the most tragic sense, invisible. Her suffering was hidden in plain sight, and this environment of chronic trauma and emotional starvation did more than just harm her, it made her tragically and desperately vulnerable. A child who is never seen, who is never held, who is never told they're safe, will search for that validation anywhere. They will learn to mistake any glimmer of attention for kindness, and any mimicry of care for love. This is the psychological mechanism that predators exploit. They do not hunt for children who are protected, they hunt for children who have already been abandoned. John Esposito was not a stranger who snatched a child from the street. The predator in this story was not a monster lurking in the shadows. He was a friend of the family, a neighbor. He was, in fact, Katie's godfather. This is the chilling nucleus of the betrayal. The man who would build a dungeon for her was a man who was meant to be her protector. He was a fixture in her life, a trusted figure who exploited his access with chilling calculation. He understood the void at the center of Katie's life, and he positioned himself to fill it. His grooming was not a complex manipulation. It was tragically simple. He offered her the very things she was starved for: gifts, outings, and, most importantly, attention. To a child living in her world, these small kindnesses were a lifeline. They felt like safety. They were, in reality, the careful, patient construction of a trap. Esposito's campaign targeted not just Katie, but her brother as well, weaving himself into the fabric of the dysfunctional family structure. He was building trust, not with the children themselves, but with the idea of being a provider. He was creating a narrative where he was the fun uncle, the one person they could rely on. Every gift, every trip, every kind word was a calculated investment in her eventual abduction. He was isolating her, not by force, but by feigning the affection she craved. The profound tragedy of Katie's early life is compounded by the fact that John Esposito was not an isolated threat. The world she was forced to navigate was perilous on multiple fronts. The investigation into her kidnapping would later reveal that another man, Salvatore Inghilari, had also been sexually abusing her. This fact is crucial. It underscores the terrifying reality of her daily existence. She was not a safe child who was suddenly targeted by one predator. She was a child trapped in an environment where predators were a part of the landscape, where the adults who were meant to form a barrier of protection had either collapsed that barrier or become the threat themselves. This was the world Katie Beers lived in before she was taken. It was a life of profound instability and persistent danger. She had already been failed, repeatedly and catastrophically, by the very adults meant to ensure her survival. Her kidnapping, therefore, was not a random act of violence. It was the final, devastating exploitation of a vulnerability that had been diagnosed, cultivated, and nurtured for years by the man she was taught to trust. The concrete bunker he built was simply the physical manifestation of the emotional prison she had long inhabited. She was a child primed for capture, because in her world, John Esposito looked like a savior. Here is the next segment of the story. The predator in plain sight. The man at the center of this betrayal was John Esposito. To the outside world, and especially to the family he had infiltrated, he was a familiar, non-threatening figure. He was a neighbor. He was a friend of the family. He was, in a devastating irony, Katie's own godfather. This position, which should have been one of trust and protection, was instead his greatest tool. He operated not from the shadows, but from within the family circle itself. He was a constant presence, a man who had earned access through casual friendship and shared time. He was seen as harmless, perhaps even helpful, a man who paid special attention to the children so often overlooked. But beneath this carefully constructed mask of the friendly neighbor, there was a dark and documented history. This was not John Esposito's first encounter with the law, nor his first predatory act. His history included a 1977 arrest for the attempted abduction of a young boy. This crucial fact reframes his entire relationship with Katie and her family. His kindness was not kindness. It was a practiced tactic. His attention was not affection. It was reconnaissance. He was a known predator who, having escaped significant consequences years earlier, had simply refined his methods. He had learned to blend in, to weaponize trust, and to identify the most vulnerable targets. Children who were emotionally starved and poorly protected. His grooming of Katie was a masterful, calculated campaign of exploitation. He understood the profound neglect she was suffering. He knew she craved stability and kindness. Answer, he provided it. He gave her gifts. He gave her brother attention. He created an association in her mind. John Esposito was the person who was nice to her. He was the one who saw her. This calculated campaign was designed to do one thing: dismantle any natural boundaries a child might have. He was systematically dismantling her sense of caution, replacing it with a deep-seated, manufactured trust. He was making himself indispensable, the one, safe, adult in her perilous world. But even this insidious grooming, this psychological warfare waged against a child, was only the first part of his plan. John Esposito was not just an opportunistic predator. He was a meticulous planner. While he was buying Katie gifts and taking her on outings, he was, in secret, engaged in a far more sinister project. He was building a prison. This wasn't a last-minute, improvised crime. The dossier is clear. He had constructed a custom-built underground prison specifically for her. This chilling premeditation elevates the horror of his actions. Every day he smiled at her, every gift he gave, he was simultaneously digging and pouring the concrete for the cell he intended to put her in. He was not just a predator waiting for a chance. He was an architect of a crime, patiently grooming his chosen victim while he built the very trap he would one day spring. He was a man living two lives: the friendly godfather above ground, and the meticulous kidnapper below. And soon, he would be ready. Here is the next segment of the story. The day of the abduction. December 28, 1992. The date was significant. It was just 2 days before Katie Beers's 10th birthday. For any child, a 10th birthday is a milestone, a moment of excitement and anticipation. For Katie, living in a world of profound neglect, the promise of a celebration or a gift was an event of enormous, almost desperate, importance. John Esposito knew this. His calculated grooming had always revolved around providing the things she was denied. He had positioned himself as the source of kindness and generosity in her life. Now, he would use that manufactured trust, and the excitement of her upcoming birthday, as the final piece of his trap. On that Monday, Esposito approached her with the one promise he knew she couldn't resist: he had birthday presents for her. He told her they were at his home, waiting for her. For a child like Katie, this was not a suspicious offer from a stranger. This was a moment of pure joy. This was John, her godfather, the one adult who consistently remembered her, who gave her things, who made her feel seen. His offer was the fulfillment of the very role he had spent months, possibly years, perfecting. There was no reason for her to doubt him. No reason for her to feel fear. Her world had taught her to fear indifference and neglect, not the hand that offered a gift. And so, she went with him. She was lured to his home on Long Island, not by force, not with a weapon, but with the simple, devastating promise of birthday presents. She walked willingly, unsuspecting, believing she was about to receive a rare moment of happiness. She entered the house, just as she had likely done before. But this time, everything was different. The friendly neighbor, the trusted godfather, was gone. In his place was the meticulous predator who had been waiting for this exact moment. Once she was inside, away from the eyes of the world, the mask dropped. The trap, so carefully built and so patiently set, finally snapped shut. The promise of presents was a lie. The man she trusted was an illusion. And as he forced her toward the hidden entrance of the prison he had built for her, Katie Beers's world, already so precarious, collapsed into absolute darkness. Here is the next segment of the story. The 6x7-foot prison. The place John Esposito forced Katie into was not an ordinary basement. It was not a spare room. It was a purpose-built prison, a concrete tomb engineered with chilling foresight and meticulous, patient labor. This structure, hidden beneath his unremarkable home, was a chilling testament to his premeditation. It was a space designed not just for capture, but for long-term, absolute control. The entrance itself was a masterpiece of deception. It wasn't a simple door. It was hidden from the world by layers of domestic normalcy. A heavy, movable bookcase, something found in any home, had to be wheeled aside. Behind it, a rug concealed the final secret, a 200-pound concrete trapdoor. This was not something a child, or even most adults, could move. It was a seal, separating the everyday world above from the nightmare he had built below. Once the heavy door was lifted, it revealed a dark, narrow passage. This was a 6-foot-long tunnel, forcing Katie to crawl or crouch, leading her further underground, further from the light, further from any hope of being heard. The tunnel opened into the main chamber, the bunker itself. The dimensions are horrifying in their smallness. A concrete box, just 6 feet by 7 feet. It was a cell in every sense of the word. It was damp, cold, and entombed in earth. Inside this cell, Esposito had installed a commode, a grim indicator of his plan for a long-term, permanent stay. He had also installed a closed-circuit television system, allowing him to monitor her every moment, a constant, oppressive, electronic gaze that robbed her of even the privacy of her own terror. But the horror of this design had another, even more terrifying layer. Within this 6 by 7-foot bunker, Esposito had built a second, smaller room. The dossier describes it as a coffin-sized space. This room was soundproofed. It was an interior tomb, a place of total sensory deprivation, designed to eliminate any possibility of her cries for help ever reaching the outside world. It was here, inside this soundproof box, within the larger concrete cell, that Katie was chained to the wall by her neck. Let us pause to comprehend what this means. This was not an impulsive act. This was a man who had spent months, perhaps longer, digging, mixing concrete, building walls, running electrical wires, and soundproofing a space. He had designed a system of total dependency. The chain ensured she could not move. The soundproofing ensured she could not be heard. The CCTV ensured she was never truly alone. The sheer weight of the trap door ensured she could never, ever get out. It was a structure built from a blueprint of pure malevolence, an engineered hell designed for one purpose: to break a 9-year-old child. Here is the next segment of the story. 17 days of darkness. For 17 days, this concrete box was her entire world. December 28, 1992, gave way to January 13, 1993. Her 10th birthday, December 30th, passed in the cold and the dark. The turn of the new year, a time of celebration for the world above, was for her just another cycle of terror. Her existence was reduced to a horrifying and predictable routine, entirely dictated by her captor. John Esposito would visit her. These visits were the only human contact she had, a terrifying distortion of human interaction. He was, at once, her jailer and her sole provider, a dynamic he had engineered for maximum psychological control. He would bring her food and blankets. He would even bring her toys. This detail is perhaps one of the most twisted. The act of giving a toy, a symbol of childhood and comfort, was a grotesque continuation of the grooming that had led her here. It was a calculated performance of care, a way to further confuse and break down her reality, positioning himself as a provider even as he was her tormentor. These visits, however, were also the vehicle for his ultimate crime. The dossier states that during this time, he subjected her to repeated sexual abuse. He was in total control, in a space he had built for this very purpose, and he exploited her absolute helplessness, day after day. Her isolation was near total, but she was never truly alone. The closed-circuit television system was his all-seeing eye. She was under constant surveillance. This meant there was no reprieve, no moment of privacy, no place to hide. The psychological weight of being perpetually watched, combined with the sensory deprivation of the bunker, is almost impossible to comprehend. Esposito's cruelty was not just physical, it was deeply psychological. He did not just want to imprison her, he wanted to extinguish her hope. He told her, plainly, that she would remain in the bunker for the rest of her life. This was his endgame, to make her believe that the world above was gone forever, that no one was looking for her, that he was her entire reality, and this 6by 7-foot room was her new, permanent home. He was attempting to erase her past and annihilate her future, leaving only the terrifying present he controlled. But even in that absolute darkness, the will to survive flickered. At one point during her 17-day ordeal, when Esposito was away, Katie found a key. We do not know how, only that she did. In a moment of incredible bravery and resourcefulness, she managed to unchain herself from the wall. One can only imagine the surge of adrenaline. The fear, mixed with a desperate, sudden hope. She was free from the chain. She was free from the coffin-sized inner room. She was, for a moment, mobile. She made her way out of the soundproofed box and into the main bunker. She was free. But she was still underground. Her hope was immediately crushed by the brutal reality of Esposito's engineering. Escape from the main bunker was, as the dossier states, impossible. The 200-pound concrete trap door, concealed above the 6-foot tunnel, was immovable from below. There was no handle, no lever, no way for a 9-year-old child to budge it even an inch. The escape attempt was over. The hope was extinguished. She was still trapped. This moment, perhaps more than any other, captures the calculated cruelty of her prison. Esposito had accounted for everything. He had built a flawless trap, a concrete box with no human exit. Her captivity was an experience of absolute terror and engineered isolation. It was a world of one captor, one victim, in a space designed to destroy her. She was chained, abused, watched, and lied to by the one man she had been taught to trust, a man who had systematically dismantled her safety, her trust, and, he hoped, her will to live. Here is the next segment of the story. The campaign of deception. Immediately after sealing his 9-year-old goddaughter in her concrete tomb, John Esposito began a cold-blooded and calculated campaign of deception. He did not hide. He did not flee. He immediately inserted himself into the narrative, not as a suspect, but as a distraught and helpful witness. His first move was a piece of chilling psychological theater. He forced Katie, from the terror of her new prison, to record a message. Her voice, small and terrified, was captured on tape, forced to recite a desperate, terrifying lie, that she had been taken by a stranger, a man with a knife. This recording was his prop, the key to his false trail. He then drove to a local amusement arcade, a public place bustling with activity, the perfect stage for his performance. He went to a payphone outside the building and played the recording, creating the illusion of a ransom call or a desperate plea. He then ran inside, putting on a frantic show for the arcade staff. He told them he had lost her, that she had been right with him, and had vanished inside the building. He was creating a fictional kidnapper, a fictional location, and a fictional timeline, all designed to point away from him. He was performing the role of the terrified family friend while knowing, at that very moment, that she was alive, chained, and trapped beneath his own home. It was a brazen and cruel attempt to send investigators on a wild goose chase, wasting precious time and resources, buying him more days to continue his horrific crime in secret. Here is the next segment of the story. The investigation. John Esposito's elaborate performance at the amusement arcade was designed to send the police on a frantic, public search. He wanted a manhunt, a media circus focused on a fictional stranger. But investigators did not take the bait. Despite his attempts at misdirection, law enforcement quickly and quietly zeroed in on John Esposito himself. His story, the story of a girl vanishing from a crowded arcade, began to crumble almost immediately. There were two critical factors that made him the primary suspect. The first was his own past. Police ran his name and uncovered his history, the 1977 arrest for the attempted abduction of a young boy. This was an enormous red flag. It instantly transformed him from a family friend into a known, documented predator with a relevant history. The second factor was the simple, diligent work of police interviews. Investigators spoke to the staff at the amusement arcade, the very witnesses Esposito had tried to use for his alibi. Their statements were damning. They told police that, contrary to his frantic story, John Esposito had entered the building alone. He claimed he had lost Katie inside, but witnesses confirmed she was never with him. The entire, lost in the arcade, scenario was a lie, and in telling that lie, Esposito had inadvertently placed himself at the center of his own crime. He was now the primary suspect. For 17 days, as the public search for Katie Beers grew more and in a desperate, public search, police applied relentless, focused pressure on the man they believed was responsible. This was not a high-speed chase. It was a slow, methodical, psychological siege. Esposito was under intense scrutiny. Detectives interviewed him, observed him, and shadowed him. He was a man living with an impossible secret, trying to maintain a mask of normalcy while an entire police force watched his every move, waiting for him to break. And for 17 agonizing days, he held. Then, on January 13, 1993, after 17 days of unbearable pressure, John Esposito finally confessed. 1 The weight of his lie, the constant police presence, and the knowledge of what he had done, became too much. The mask shattered. He admitted it. He told them he had Katie. He told them where she was. Here is the next segment of the story. The rescue. After 17 days of holding an entire community's hope in the balance, John Esposito's confession was a seismic shock. But there was no time for relief, only a desperate, frantic urgency. He led investigators to his home, the very home they had likely watched for days, never knowing the secret it held just feet beneath the ground. Officers' tactical units, and investigators descended on the house, their every move dictated by the man who was now their prisoner. This was the moment, the culmination of 17 days of fear. Esposito pointed them to the spot. A room, unremarkable, domestic. He showed them the movable bookcase, which officers quickly shoved aside. He pointed to the rug on the floor. When they pulled it back, they saw it, the 200-pound concrete trapdoor. The seal to his underground prison. Officers, adrenaline surging, pried it open, the heavy slab groaning as it revealed the dark, narrow passage below. They descended, one by one, into the 6-foot tunnel, their flashlight beams cutting through the musty, cold air. The tunnel opened into the 6 by 7-foot concrete cell. And there, in the darkness, she was. Katie Beers. Pale, stunned, but alive. After 408 hours of unimaginable terror, she was found. One can only imagine the profound, staggering shock of that moment for the rescuers. To see a child, who many feared was gone forever, staring back at them from inside a concrete tomb. They unchained her. They lifted her. They carried her up the tunnel, past the heavy trapdoor, and out of the bookcase. She was brought up from the darkness and back into the world. The image of that small, pale girl being carried out of that house, alive, was a moment of profound, collective relief that captivated the entire nation. The 17-day nightmare was over. Katie Beers had been found. She had survived. Here is the next segment of the story. The catalyst for salvation. The rescue of Katie Beers was a media sensation. It was a story of a monster, a hidden bunker, and a miraculous survival. But as the nation's attention was fixed on the 17 days of horror she endured, the intense scrutiny from both law enforcement and the media began to illuminate the dark world she had inhabited long before the abduction. The investigation had not just unearthed a secret dungeon, it had exposed a secret life. The chronic abuse, the profound neglect, the squalor, and the constant danger that had defined Katie's entire childhood were laid bare for the authorities to see. This is the central, stunning paradox of Katie Beers's story. The kidnapping, an unambiguously horrific event designed to destroy her, became the paradoxical catalyst for her salvation. Her rescue from John Esposito's bunker did not lead to a joyful reunion with her birth family. It couldn't. The authorities, now fully aware of the daily perils she faced at home, made the critical and life-altering decision: Katie Beers would not be returned to her family. The very systems that had failed to see her suffering for 9 years were now, finally, forced to act. The kidnapping, in its terrible and public way, had finally made her visible. It had broken the cycle of neglect that had left her vulnerable in the first place. Her life was about to be rebuilt from the ground up. She was placed into the foster care system, a move that would ultimately change her destiny. She was taken in by a protective and deeply loving foster family in East Hampton, New York. It was a world away from everything she had ever known. This new beginning was fiercely guarded. The community that now surrounded her, from the local police to her new neighbors, understood the profound trauma she had endured. They formed a quiet, determined barrier around her. Police provided security, ensuring her past could not reach her. Neighbors, in an act of collective decency, respected her privacy, refusing to let her become a local spectacle or a living headline. For the first time in her 10 years of life, Katie Beers was given the one thing she had never had: a chance. A chance to have a normal childhood. A chance to feel safe in her own home. A chance to go to school, to make friends, to heal, all protected from the glare of the public eye that had, ironically, saved her. The kidnapping, an act designed to be the end of her life, had, in a strange and terrible twist of fate, become the beginning of it. Here is the final segment of the story. The end of the story. The legal conclusion for the man who built the bunker was swift and decisive. John Esposito, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, pleaded guilty to first-degree kidnapping. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. His life ended, just as he had intended for Katie, in a small, confined cell. He died of apparently natural causes at Sing Sing prison in September 2013. In a final, fitting twist of justice, his death came just hours after he had been denied parole for the 4th time. The man who had tried to erase a child's future would, in the end, die without a single day of freedom. And what of the girl who survived? For 2 decades, the world heard nothing from Katie Beers. She had been given a new life, and she chose to live it. She disappeared from the headlines, protected by the community and the foster family that had embraced her. She grew up. She healed. She had the normal childhood that had been stolen from her. She re-emerged into the public eye, not as a victim, but as a survivor in the truest sense of the word. She came forward on her own terms, as an adult. The little girl who had been raised in squalor and neglect, and who survived 17 days in a concrete tomb, was now a college graduate. She was a wife. She was a mother of 2 children of her own. She had taken the trauma inflicted upon her and refused to let it define her. She became the author of a memoir, taking control of her own story and sharing her journey. Her journey demonstrates a profound and powerful truth: while trauma can define a chapter of a life, it does not have to define the entire story. The most powerful perspective comes from Katie herself, as later recounted by her therapist. She has often reflected that the kidnapping, that 17-day period of absolute horror, was, in a strange and terrible way, one of the best things that ever happened to her. Not because of the event itself, but because of what it revealed. It was the horrific catalyst that finally exposed her unbearable home life. It was the event that forced the world to see her. It led her away from the neglect and abuse she was suffering, and led her to a new family and a new life, a life where she was, for the very first time, finally safe.